Order is a story that we've all chosen to be involved in. We may be involved in a tiny, small way, or we may be really fully involved with it. But nevertheless, it's a chosen story for us that is colouring our life in some way at this particular moment in time, this special moment in time. And so if we look at this particular story of the Order now, and we see how 50 years ago, Nguyen and Vera Chapman, two senior Druids, forming this new order in 1964, other Druids gathering together, and they planted seeds 50 years ago, which have grown into an order that we see today. And we could see it as these seeds having grown into a great forest, because the trees are now growing all over the earth, as we've seen with the people who've come from many different places. So what were those seeds that they planted? Well, one of the seeds was quite simply the recognition of the importance of the world itself, the world of nature, so that the path, the spiritual path, is not just one of personal salvation and enlightenment, but is inextricably tied up with the welfare of the planet. Another seed was the reintroduction of the eightfold wheel of the year.
When you or I want to properly orient ourselves, what we do is we regard the cardinal directions. We look to the north, south, east and west. We map our course from how the sun is in the sky. We look to find the clues that lead us to find us where we are. And each of those directions feels different. Each speaks to us in a different way, giving us different messages, so that we're not just aware of the physical cardinal directions, but also the unmanifest, invisible ones too. They are unseen, but just as real. And so, in a similar way, our Druidic initiation involves us finding the internal compass points of Druidry.
A focus on an interest in the bardic arts, the arts of bardistry, is something that Nguyen introduced as well, being a poet himself. It had always been there, of course, but he was keen on reviving the bardic arts. And as soon as the order was established, he began Eisteddfodau, of poets and musicians meeting in halls in London or at ceremonies at Beltane and so on.
Fetally foldable, bodily moldable, squeaker, snorter, prodigal daughter, snuffler, grunter, sweet milky truffle hunter. You make my body wobble as you latch and suck and gobble. You make me spout insipid twaddle. My bulimic onesie supermodel.
So when I was initiated in 1970, when I was 18, up on Glastonbury tour, he invited the third year band to play. In many ways, he was a very old-fashioned man, but he could hear the call of the future. He had read John Michel's book that became this cult classic in 1969, A View Over Atlantis. He was in touch with John Michel. And that ability to combine a respect for heritage and tradition with welcoming in the new was an attribute that I see from the very beginning of the story of the order. And then what happened is those seeds were only cast into the soil for 11 years because Nguyen died in 1975 and the order went into a kind of winter sleep for 13 years. So the history of the order, those 50 years, really falls into three parts. The first 11 years, seeds being planted, 13 years of them lying fallow, went to sleep, and then the refounding of the order in 1988.
I come from the grove of the bards. I bring the light of the internal fire of the imagination and the fire of the creativity that is within us all.
But if we take this idea of looking at the environment in which stories grow, something very interesting emerges. We see what was the soil that these seeds were thrown into. And the soil was the 1960s, a time when we had recovered from the trauma of the two world wars, had moved into the phase in the 1950s of Reconstruction. And then the 1960s, that Reconstruction had taken place, and it was the era of flower power, of the gay rights movement, of the women's rights movement, of lots of rights movements coming up to the surface. And so the 1960s, 1964 was absolutely the time when those seeds that were being cast could find fertile ground. But then what happened, as you go into the 70s and 80s, you see this was the era of Nixon, Reagan, Thatcher. It was the era of massive consumerism. The 60s were called the me generation. The 80s were called the me generation. Of course, people were aware of the threats to the environment, but the majority of people didn't give a fig because they were out shopping. But then you had the huge events towards the end of the 80s, and the atmosphere changed. As we moved towards the end of the millennium, people started to become aware of the fate that was hanging over the planet. And you know the way we humans work is we only kind of really start to treasure something when it's walking out of the door. So the same thing seemed to be happening. As the millennium was coming to a close, people started to wake up. And that was the time when the order was refounded. And Nguyen asked me to put the teachings, when he just taught physically with a small group of people. And of course, there was huge geographical and logistical limitations to that. And he asked me to put the teaching in the form of a distance learning course. And this one piece of very common sense, practical advice meant that the order has been able to grow. It was if, as we moved into the 90s, this began to reach this kind of fertile soil as more people awoke to the environmental crisis, which is also a spiritual crisis that was facing the planet.
Let us all take 3 breaths together. 1 for our Mother Earth beneath us, 1 for our Father Sky above us, 1 for the seas around our sacred islands.
May our ceremony begin.
The power and radiance of this realm.
So when a tradition loses its living practitioners, it doesn't mean that the tradition is lost. Like water, it goes underground and it finds another place to come up. At least I'm sure that's my experience and your experience. And the inspiration of the mixture of the land and ancestry that connects us to spiritual sources, it weaves its own golden thread, which we follow as best we may. And if we follow it, it leads us into the tradition which we've always been connected without knowing.
We're not just a few voices crying in the wilderness, as it were. I see the order as part of thousands and thousands of groups of human beings around the world whose main concern is with the welfare of the planet, of their fellow human beings, of all the realms, animal, plant, human, mineral. And that's an incredibly exciting and hopeful movement to be a part of.
Now, in the not too distant ancient days of my youth, we had a thing called analog televisions. And the analog television was fiddled by 2 buttons, which enabled you to have a picture on a very tiny screen. One of them was the vertical hold, and the other was the horizontal hold. And I would argue that we probably need both of these still. Because in the old analog televisions, if you had a loss of horizontal hold, it usually resulted in an unwatchable picture. And if you lost your vertical synchronization, you'd have an image that rolled up and down the screen. And I think that we're living in times where we have similar problems, not on television, but in our daily lives, which are afflicting people in the same way. There's a lack of primary coordinates, and it's making life unbearable. It's disabling understanding and connection. But wherever we live in the world, and whatever our circumstances, we can still find our horizontal and vertical hold. They're absolutely essential for Druidry. So our horizontal hold is what makes us a native of the place that we live in. It entails knowing the orientation of the celestial bodies, the sun, the moon, the stars, the planets over that place and in every season. Knowing the plants, the rocks, the trees, the animals in our region. Being also aware of what is unseen, of the spirits of that place, and how they manifest in and out of time in that location. And our vertical hold transects time and place, for it's made up of the ancestral and inspirational rivers that flow into our being. Of course, the ancestral tributaries are ones we understand. They are of blood, of genetic and epigenetic tendency, which inform and shape the lives of our bodies. But we have ancestors of blood and ancestors of spirit, who we can become aware of. With our internal compass of the unseen and manifest directions, and with a well-practiced horizontal and vertical hold in place, we actually become established and seen, both in our communities, as well as to the unseen witnesses and the ancestors who are part of the living ancestral continuum. So when someone says to you, "Oh, so you call yourself a Druid then?" you just stand up and look them back in the eye and say, "No, I don't call myself a Druid. I am a Druid." Thank you.
Before me are the diamonds of light. Their sword is in my hand, with the long rays of dawn. Behind me is the cup of waters and wines, the bowl into which the diviner gazes. Where is my center? For the center rises, it lifts, and is no place. In no place and everywhere. I have spoken.
For a historian, OBOD has a role. There is no doubt that long after we're dead, long after we've been reborn as oak trees or butterflies or used space rocket salespeople, OBOD will be remembered. It's going to be part of history. At a time when, as Cutlin reminded us, Druidry is a major part of spirituality in the modern world, OBOD simply is the most successful Druid order at the present time worldwide in terms of size, in terms of impact, and in terms of staying power. So my brief this morning was quickly to say why I think this is. The beginning of the answer comes from an old friend of mine, well, a 2,500-year-old friend of mine, the Greek philosopher Aristotle. Aristotle said that the most successful structures of human endeavour are formed of a mixture of the three great political forms: monarchy, aristocracy, and democracy. And if you look around, you see this is broadly true, because each one of those has vices as well as virtues. And if you put the three together, they minimise each other's weaknesses and they maximise each other's strengths. Let's now pick OBOD apart. It has those three forces in equal strength. It has democracy. Democracy represented above all by the correspondence course, a journey which every one of us in OBOD takes individually and in our own way, a common experience to us of which we have the freedom to make what we will. And if we choose anywhere on the planet to form an OBOD group, we just go ahead and do it without having a blueprint laid down for us, without being policed in us. We simply grow. And that conforms to a basic engineering truth, which is that buildings are best built from the foundations upwards, not from the top down. But we also have aristocracy. Yes, Philip was totally right to say that there's no hierarchy, there's no ladder. But if you get to finishing your Druid course, it does feel like a mountain. And there's a nice view from the top, a shared experience of those who travelled up through each part of that experience and have in common with each other, which is why the tradition is you need a couple of druids around to found a grove as such out of a group. And at the top of the order itself, we have a nobility of talent that is unparalleled, at least in my friendship, if not in human experience. And I'll pick out two in particular for praise here. First, Stephanie Carr-Gomm, the scribe of OBOD, since the very beginning of the refoundation. And of course, there is our Pendragon, Dave the Bard. When it came down to the brass tacks and the guitar strings, this was the guy for the job.
An isle so fair, an isle so green, known by many names.
This was the same Dave who stood in front of an armed police cordon at an anti-fracking protest, and in a very, very tense moment with the authorities moving forward to clear everybody out of the way, when somebody else may have picked up a slogan, or even worse, picked up a rock, Dave picked up a guitar.
Because you know what? There's nothing to see. There's nothing to see. There's nothing to see. There's nothing to see. Won't you just look away? There's nothing to see.
And so at last we come to monarchy. If there is a single reason why OBOD has worked, it actually is Philip. I hate to admit it, but I have to do so. He is always at once like a grandfather and like an overexcitable younger brother, which is an amazing combination and keeps freshness and an authority worth respecting together at the same moment. So you put those three things together, the democratic, the aristocratic, and the monarchical element, and so far, so terrifically good. This is why OBOD has worked. And I'll finally go back to Philip's greatest single achievement, which is his superintending of the making of the correspondence course. Again, speaking as a historian, it gives me a kind of panorama. When the history of late 20th century alternative spirituality comes to be written, the OBOD correspondence course will take its place as one of the most significant bodies of spiritual writing in the Western world. It seems incredible when you're doing it to believe that, but it is literally true. It's a team effort, but then so is the Bible and the Quran. And at least in this case, we had a presiding genius in charge that nobody would mistake for a deity. So this is by way of saying well done.
As bards, as druids, we are reclaimers of story. We understand that one of the ways we can heal ourselves individually and help to heal what we see outside of ourselves is to remember the old stories, remember the stories of our ancestors, remember our personal story. And this healing, redemptive power of story is something that is known, of course, to psychology and psychotherapy, but it's known to us too in a mystical way as well. And yet, in the spiritual path, there's a way in which opposites are always in play. The paradox is working with us to help us grow and develop. Think about another pair of opposites that we work with, the chalice and the blade. On the one hand, we need to be open. We need to open to our receptive selves, to be open so that we receive inspiration and ideas, so the Arwen can flow through us. And yet at the same time, we need to be focused. We need to have specific goals. We need to know where we're going. We need to be focused in some way. We need to know where we're going, but also sometimes we need to not know where we're going. We need both. These seem to be contradictory injunctions, but they're not.
We swear by peace and love to stand, heart to heart and hand in hand. Mark, O Spirit, and hear us now, confirming this, our sacred vow.
If we do take our place in that stream of history, we know from when we have come, and we can be proud of it. We do not know where we are going, but we can start to fashion it for ourselves. And right now, right here for us, somehow, collectively, we have produced the greatest Druid order of the modern world. And the sooner we all forget that fact, the better for us all.
What is the way forward for the order, for ourselves perhaps, in this particular era we find ourselves in? So here we are, early years of the 21st century, all the kind of threats to the environment that we are faced with. And yet we're walking this spiritual path that gives us tremendous joy and strength and inspiration. My sense is we have to do this. We have to, on the one hand, respect our heritage, respect our tradition, remember our stories, celebrate it, which is why we're here to celebrate 50 years of the story of OBOD. But at the same time, we can let that go. At another level, in another way, at other times, we can just let that go and walk into the future and try to hear the call of the future. So as we chant the Arwen, let's chant that and imagine the Arwen flowing out through all those rays of light all across the planet.